Just by way of introduction, my name is Rachel Davey. I am the General Manager of Strategy and Community at Western Bay of Plenty District Council. I should be John Holyoake, who is our Chief Executive Officer, except that unfortunately John has COVID, so he's home feeling quite unwell this evening. So my apologies, you have to put up with me for a large part of this evening. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Anne. So tonight what we're going to cover is three broad sections. So I'm going to start with the getting to know your council better, and then my colleague Craig Taylor from Election Services is going to step in and talk you through the electoral process, all of the ins and outs of running for election, and then I'm going to talk a little bit, close the evening out with what happens if you're elected and some of the tips and tricks that you need to know. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of our session, and ideally that would be good to ask those questions over a cup of tea, unless they're questions that you think that the rest of the group might benefit from knowing the answer to. I think the other thing I should say before we start is if you leave this evening and feel and get home and reflect and think that there are a number of other questions that you might like to ask that you didn't get the opportunity to tonight, or if there's information you feel would help you with your decision to stand or your candidacy, you're more than welcome to make direct contact with us, and we can meet with you one-on-one. So let's start by getting to know council a little bit better. We're going to cover who we are, a little bit of the highlights of what we've achieved as a council, particularly over the last triennium. We're going to encourage you to keep an eye on the three major reforms. It would be fair to say that local government is going through its biggest reform, I'd say, since 1989. And we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of council and elected members. In local government, you hear a lot about the four well-beings. It is the essence of everything that we do. Indeed, everything we do is to improve the well-being of our community. Every decision council makes takes into account the promotion of economic, social, cultural and environmental well-being of our communities, not just now, but for the future. This is reflected in the purpose of local government. It is our statutory mandate. We provide and maintain not just infrastructure, but a number of services as well, and facilities. And they enable you to enjoy the Western Bay lifestyle that we know and love. It includes skate parks, swimming pools, playgrounds, libraries, community events, arts and culture, transport, animal services, and that's just a selection. What we do is anchored by our strategic priorities. We have a clear emphasis on community-led outcomes, place planning with community to develop outcomes frameworks, and that's together with community, Crown, tangata whenua and council. We have a strategic focus on true partnership with tangata whenua. And what that means practically is creating mana motuhake and equity by working in partnership with Māori in governance, design, delivery and monitoring of agreed outcomes. We are an enabler of housing outcomes to ensure that we are delivering the right housing across the sub-region and that housing is supported by social and hard infrastructure to ensure we create livable communities for everyone. We have a firm emphasis and a necessary emphasis on ensuring that our council is well positioned for mandated change, including that we align our support services in the wake of that reform. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it means readying our council to transition central government mandated changes, most notably Three Waters, but also local government reform and the Resource Management Act reform. We need to be a council that is fit for the future, not only in terms of positioning ourselves well for post-reform, but also meeting the expectations of our communities. Now I'd like to just touch on some of what we've achieved, and that we does include a number of incumbent councillors that are in this room this evening. So we have at Western Bay of Plenty District Council a solid track record of delivering projects, a solid commitment to robust long-term planning and prudent financial management. We had record engagement levels for our long-term plan 2021-2031. We have been able to leverage significant government funding to progress a number of key projects across our district, including $14 million from Crown Infrastructure Partners for Omokoroa and $38 million from the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund for the Omokoroa State Highway 2 intersection, all with a view to enabling the Stage 3 greenfield area of Omokoroa to be opened up for much needed housing within our sub-region. We also managed to secure $400,000 from the Provincial Growth Fund for this magnificent facility that you're in this evening. And a mention there of our curbside collections to 80% of the district and the return of Panepane Purako to the hapu of Matakana Island. We can't do what we do unless, as a council, and that means elected members and staff, unless we work collaboratively with others. So we are a council that is responsive, we are in touch with our community, and we proactively manage change. Other agencies in the public sector already see us as a reliable partner that they can work with effectively. And I think that that's borne out in the fact that we have been able to secure significant central government funding into our district to progress a significant number of projects. Success breeds success. We deliver, and that gives government confidence to partner with us. Together we can achieve great things, and it's exciting to see more collaboration in the region. We need to work closely with, and do work closely with, our neighbouring councils. That is most notably Tauranga City Council, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, but also includes Rotorua Lakes, Whakatane District Council and Opotiki District Council. We work well with central government agencies, and there most notably I'm talking about Kāinga Ora, the Ministry for Housing and Urban Development, the Ministry for Social Development, and the Department of Internal Affairs. And we pride ourselves on our relationship with tangata whenua. So that was a little bit of a look back. This is a look forward. What could you expect if you were elected? What would be on your work program coming up for you? Well, as part of our long-term plan, which I'll touch on in a moment, we will be reviewing our infrastructure strategy. It's important to note that Council spends over $30 million in capital expenditure every year on infrastructure, and we look after over $1.43 billion worth of assets. Some of you may have already seen the Your Place or Tōwahi community engagement events, or the website platform that signals the beginning of a proposal to amend our district plan, which we are required to do every 10 years. Our district plan is the mechanism through which we manage growth and land use, and it responds to smart growth, which is our spatial strategy. That the district plan is a process that takes a number of years and a number of iterations of engagement with community and key stakeholders. And shortly after becoming a councillor, one of the first things that you do is you begin the process, the rather daunting process, it would seem, of reviewing the long-term plan. That's something that we do every 3 years, and it projects out for a 10-year planning horizon. It sets the priorities, budget, and levels of service for the next decade. I think it's important to note that any short-term changes that are made to plans and budgets are laid out in annual plans, which we do each year. So as I said, the next long-term plan is due to be adopted in June 2024, but the process is such that it starts early next year. I mentioned earlier the need to keep an eye on what's happening nationally and the nature and extent of the reform that's coming at local government. And I'm sure all of you are aware of the Three Waters reform. We know that there is a Water Services Entity Bill before the House presently. We will still have the opportunity to submit on matters such as service charges and regulation, and the transfer is scheduled to occur July 2024. I mentioned also the Resource Management Act, which is a significant reform, some say well overdue reform, which proposes repealing the Resource Management Act and replacing it with 3 new key pieces of legislation, only one of which is starting to take shape at the moment. We anticipate that the draft version of the Natural and Built Environments Bill will be released in or around October of this year. And lastly, the future for local government, which is following a little bit behind the resource management reform. We are expecting recommendations from the panel that has been established for this purpose to release its findings in April 2023. So just a little bit of an insight into the basics of council and elected members. There are 2 parts to council, the first of which is our governance arm, which is made up of the mayor and councillors. Our mayor and councillors essentially set our strategic direction and monitor our progress against that strategic direction. And then underneath the governance, our mayor and councillors sits the organisation made up of the chief executive and staff. Western Bay's governance comprises 12 elected members, that is the mayor plus 11 councillors. So beyond the mayor, we have 3 councillors in the Katikati Waihi Beach ward, 4 in the Kaimai ward, and 4 in the Maketu Te Puke ward. We also have a number of community boards. So in this regard, there are 20 elected members from 5 communities, Waihi Beach, Katikati, Omokoroa, Te Puke and Maketu. And the community boards consist of 2 councillors from the ward and 4 community board members. The role of a community board is quite different from the role of a councillor. So community boards fundamentally represent and advocate for their community. They consider and report on matters that might be referred to that board by council or its committees. They maintain an overview of services provided by council within the community. They prepare an annual submission, typically, or an annual submission to the annual plan or to the long-term plan, setting out their expenditure requirements. And I think it's important to note that the responsibilities of community boards are determined by council.
Good evening, everybody. Craig Taylor is my name. I come from Independent Election Services. Now, I work very closely with your electoral officer, Dale Soski. He sends his apologies, he can't be here today, but there are some familiar faces in the room. We've been in meetings before and have crossed paths. This evening, what I'm going to talk about, I'm just going to go through the electoral process, starting with nominations, going through what that means, how it's done, and then moving on to the voting process as well. But primarily we're talking about nominations. And then what we'll do is, I've got a few slides here. I'm going to talk about I'm going to try and get there within 20 minutes. And so if there's things that have already been covered off by Wendy, I might just move on. And I'll read the slide and have a look, and then if there's anything there that I think is really important, then I'll pause on that and we'll just go into some more detail. But essentially what I'm going to talk about, I was just going to touch on the highlighted pieces for you. So based on the figures at the moment, the Western Bay of Plenty District Council has a population of probably around about 58, just over 58,000. And of that, you've got just over 42,500 electors. And don't forget, this year there will be no DHB elections. Remember, the DHB elections have been scrapped, and so your voting paper will no longer have DHB. They will only include the issues for mayor, the ward, community board, and your regional council elections. Both the district council and the regional council are still FPP, which is first past the post. And the order of candidate names for the district council will be random this year. Now that means, what random means is that no two voting papers will have the order of candidates in the same order. Okay, some key dates. The first one is no longer a key date because it's gone. The second one is the 12th of August. That is a key date. That's coming up pretty quickly. That's when nominations close at midday. And just on that, they close at midday sharp. So 1 minute past 12, you will not be lucky. You'll be turned away if you try to hand in your nomination paper at 1 minute past 12. So I guess the key takeaway from that point there is that get in early. Don't leave it to the last minute. If you're new at this process, then spend some time working through the paperwork, making sure you've got everything in order, and then get on down to your service centre to hand in your nomination. 8th of October is voting day. Voting papers will be mailed to people from the 16th of September. There's a 5-day period from the 16th to the 21st when New Zealand Post are legally obligated to ensure that your voting paper arrives within 5 days. Now we know that New Zealand Post at the moment may be experiencing some struggles, but they assure us that they will still maintain their legal obligation on 5 days. Voting closes at midday on Saturday the 8th of October, and shortly after that we'll be issuing some progress results. Now the progress results will be primarily 95% of the votes cast. What we haven't got will be any hand-delivered votes to council that are still working their way through to my office, but also the special votes. Now special votes are a complicated beast. But once we get them, we need to process them, make sure that they are compliant, and if they're compliant, they go through to the Electoral Commission to give us a tick that yes, we can count that person as a vote. So that takes a bit longer. DAYA will issue the declaration of results from about the 13th of October. Now, Wendy's already spoken about what your district's made up of, so I won't go back into that detail there. I still get a lot of questions about the electoral roll. There is 2 electoral rolls. There's the general parliamentary roll, but there's also the ratepayer roll. So the resident electoral roll, which is the parliamentary roll, you've got to be a New Zealand citizen of 18 years or older. You've got to reside continuously in New Zealand for 1 year or more. You've got to be at the same address for 1 month or more, and that information is, when you enrol, is provided to the Electoral Commission. They maintain the electoral roll. The ratepayer roll is different. It's for non-residents basically, so people who perhaps own property in this district but live outside the district, they may be entitled to some additional voting entitlements within this district. It's a roll that is based on application only, and it is updated once every 3 years. It's not automatic. People need to fill in an application form which comes through to my office, and Dale assesses that and makes sure that that person is still eligible to receive votes. For this district, there is a very small number. It's roughly about 180. I know for a fact there probably is a lot more people who own property in this district who don't actually apply to go onto this particular role. To be a candidate, there's not a lot required to be a candidate. You must be a New Zealand citizen. You've got to be 18 or older, and you've got to be enrolled on the parliamentary electoral roll. All right, that's it. And you can be on the parliamentary electoral roll anywhere in the country. You don't have to be within this district. You can stand for multiple positions. You can stand for mayor, you can stand for council, and you can stand for the community board. However, if you are successful to more than one position, the highest position is the position you must take. The lower positions will then go through and be recalculated, and the next highest polling candidate will be the successful candidate. You cannot stand for the district council and the regional council. That's not permitted by law, and someone asked me the other day, why not? If you want to hedge your bets and stand for both councils, apart from it being contrary to the law, I suggest that the councils have two different directions. They've got two different strategic goals, and there may be a bit of a conflict of interest there. Not to mention perhaps some confusion for electors. You can only stand for one ward in the council area, plus or constituency if it's regional council. You can't stand for more than one ward. If you're thinking about standing, you need to make sure that you or your spouse do not have current contracts with the council of $25,000 or more, including GST, in one financial year. If that is the case, then it would be advisable that you seek some advice from the Office of Auditor General on what you should do if you still wish to maintain or pursue your candidacy. If you're an employee of the council, you can stand. You can stand for election. If you're standing for the mayor or for councillors, I would recommend that you have a conversation with your immediate supervisor, because there may be some certain aspects that need to be managed in terms of your access to council resources. However, if you are elected to mayor and or council, then you would need to resign. That doesn't apply to the community board, however, although it may be a question as to whether or not you think that you can do, if you're an employee, whether you'll be able to manage both roles. You cannot nominate yourself. You need two nominators who are electors in the district. If you're standing for mayor, your nominators must be residing within the entire district. If it's the ward you're standing for, then your nominators must be within the ward. And they must be on the electoral roll at the address that they have put on the nomination. God, you know, we've had so many come in the last little while in my office where the nominators are actually not on the electoral roll to the address they've put on the nomination form. So it just delays that process. And a little bit earlier, I was talking about potentially coming in and getting your nomination done early. Don't leave it to the last minute. That's a good tip. Because if there is a slight little problem with your nomination, such as your nominator isn't on the electoral roll, then you're going to have to go away and sort that out. And if it's 1 minute to 12, you won't have enough time. So we really need you to make sure those forms are filled in correctly from the get-go, because we do want you to stand. We want you to be successful in getting into that, getting past that first barrier, that first stage. Remuneration. Look, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of this. I do believe it's set by the Remuneration Authority, and it's not negotiable. However, I think it's all divvied up between council at certain meetings and things. That's not a process that I am involved in. However, that just gives you an indication of what sort of pay packets involved. Okay, nomination process. So as I said before, nominations have already opened. We're now a couple of weeks into it. And these locations are where you can get your papers from. And in fact, we've got some here this evening if anybody would like one. Council's main office, Barks Corner, of course, Waihi Beach, Karekare, Mokoroa, and Te Puke service centres and also on the website, Council's website. And of course, calling my office as well on that 0800 number, free phone. We can simply email you a copy or send it to you in the post, but I would recommend the closer we get to the 12th of August is that we'll send it to you by email. The nomination papers, so when you fill one in and hand it in, you must have all of the documentation put together and handed in together at the same time. You aren't able to hand in your nomination form and then ask, can I pay my deposit tomorrow? Or can I send you in my photograph and my candidate profile statement when I've got it ready? No, you can't. You must have it all there at the same time for processing. So your deposit, your candidate nomination deposit is $200. That can be refundable as long as you are either elected or you are within 25% of the lowest elected person. If there's more than one position, so if there's say there's four positions available, so the person, if you come within 25% of your votes within the lowest elected successful person, you will be eligible to receive your nomination deposit back, refunded to you. And I can tell you that a large portion of people do get their nomination deposit back, large portion. Your candidate profile statement, now just be aware of this, spend some time on it. Don't rush it. It is important because this is what goes out to all of your electors. If you recall in your voting packs that come in the mail, there's a little slip booklet that comes in. Yes, it's very small printing and it's hard to read. Those are the constraints that we have to work with. However, that's the information that goes out to all your electors to find out about you, about your policy, about what you stand for and what you can do. So make sure you spend some time on that. It's a 150-word limit in English, and if you want to include te reo, it's 150 words in English and te reo if you want to do that. If you want to include Māori, then it has to be largely similar to your English version. It can't be totally different. But we do know that te reo does not translate to English exact word for word, so there is a bit of a balancing act there. Passport photo, yes please. If you can do it on the best quality passport photo you can get. We are receiving a lot of digitally printed images on A4 paper. It's we'll still use it, but be aware the quality won't be as good in your candidate profile booklet that comes out in the paperwork with your voting documents. We can only be as good as the image that we are provided. So make sure you've got a good photo of yourself on good quality passport photo. Evidence of citizenship. So this is reasonably new. I think we did it in 2019. And all it is a copy of your passport. It can be an expired passport. Citizenship ceremony certificate, birth certificate, something like that. And the person who's receiving your nomination, they just need to cite it and just mark on the nomination form cited. Or if you wish to provide a copy, then that's fine as well. And really all that's doing is confirming that you are a New Zealand citizen, which is ticking the box for that, and so that if we wouldn't want you to be elected if you weren't a New Zealand citizen, because then we'll be straight into a by-election, which is not good. You are able to have an affiliation, so if you were standing under a a political ticket, then you can use that. You can state that in the nomination form, and that will be printed onto the candidate profile booklet that comes out. And the obvious ones are National Labour, Greens, all the major political parties. They are sending them through now thick and fast to us. If you are standing, you do have an affiliation, be aware please to also include an approval letter, which means it's come from the organisation to say that they approve you to use that organisation's name as your affiliation. Just on the affiliations, slogans, indecent, slanderous materials, it's not accepted. Dale's pretty tough on this, and he reads every single one of them, and he quite often will remove. At the end of the day, the electoral office has got the last say. We'll ask you about it. We'll communicate with the candidate and make sure that everything's correct. However, he has the last say, and if it's necessary, will remove it if it doesn't comply. Your principal place of residence it's just a tick box on the nomination form, but that will also be translated into your candidate profile, which comes out in your voting mailers. So whether you live in or outside the district or the area that you're standing for. If you're standing for more than one position, then you need to tick that. I'm also standing for, and it'll just be mayor and ward or community board. That's a good little tip. Okay, nominations close 12 noon sharp. Don't leave it to the last minute. Okay, campaigning. Now this can generate a bit of discussion sometimes. Campaigning can occur at any time from now. The real key here is to be aware of the District Council's signs policy of where you can or when you can put signs up and where. So for Western Bay, no signs are permitted on council property, no signs on private property without the landowner's permission. That doesn't mean the person who is renting the property, it means the owner of the land. The person renting doesn't have a say over whether or not they are able to permit signs to go up on their front fence. This has been a new change in the law on the 1st of July, so those of you who are experienced will know that all advertising, which includes signs, any election material that you produce, which may be leaflets, booklets, or social media, I'll go into social media shortly, must have an authorisation statement, and it simply reads authorised by a true name of a person. It might be authorised by Craig Taylor. And in the past, up until the 1st of July this year, we've had to put authorised by Craig Taylor and a physical address, whether it be residential or a commercial address. Now they've changed the law on that, and now you can also add an email address, you can have a PO box address, you can have just a phone number, whether it be a cell phone number or a landline, it doesn't matter. You can even have a website that directs anybody to a website or a web page that has some contact details on it. The reason behind that change is to remove any unsolicited and unwanted visits to personal addresses or even commercial addresses. If you're fortunate enough to have a campaign manager, then it'll be authorised by campaign manager's name and perhaps a PO box or an email, and that's as simple as it gets. Okay, on to now talking about social media for a second. It's Facebook. Most social media platforms are great, especially for campaigning for election. They go far and wide. They're cheap to run. You're going to reach a lot of people. Your authorisation statement needs to be, for example, on your landing page for whatever social media platform you use. If it's Facebook, it can be somewhere within the About the Page tab. But somewhere on the main landing page needs to be an authorisation statement. Every other post that you create or tweet or Instagram, whatever it is, doesn't have to have it, as long as it's somewhere on the main page. And that's all the requirement for social media. I can remember back in 2019 that we would have so many complaints about this person's advertising their election campaign on Facebook, but they don't have an authorisation statement. And trying to find it, it's incredible. Facebook's got all these things, that tabs and whatever else. So if you're not familiar with it, then it makes it quite difficult. All right, I've just spoken about this now. So for those who are current elected members who are thinking about standing again, the council's resources are off limits. And I think you would have experienced this in the past. The reason for that is that it has to be a level playing field for everybody. The general public don't get those resources to get far and wide reach for your district to your electors through Facebook and whatever else. So council resources are off limits. Just a note: be careful. There is possibilities of social media being hacked. Websites being redirected to other candidates' web pages. Not that they know anything about that, but it can happen, and it does happen. Just on that particular issue itself, those particular URLs were up for sale. They weren't owned by anybody at the time, so they are actually available to anybody. So craigtaylor.co.nz, I don't own that. So anybody could go and buy that and use it for their own purposes. What they can't do is impersonate me. That becomes a problem for them in a criminal matter. Okay, so we're going to touch on now, so you can't just have a huge pot of gold and spend as much as you like on your campaign. There are limits, and the limits are based on the population of the seat or the area that you're wishing to stand in. Obviously, the mayor has the entire district, that gets the higher limit. The population of each of the wards are based on, will have a limit themselves, and it works its way down through to the areas for the community boards as well. So here we go for the wards. So we'll read these out to you just briefly. So the Karakari Waihi Beach ward, you roughly got about 16.5 or just over. And it's a $14,000 limit. Kaimai, you're just over 20,500 population, so you've got a $20,000 limit. The Makatu, Tipuki, you're just under the 30,000 mark, so you've also got a $20,000 limit. The Mere, just under 60,000, so that's a $30,000 limit for the Mere. Community boards. So Waihi Beach, 3.5. Karikari, you're $14,000. Omokoroa, you got 3.5 as well. Tipuki, 14,000. And Makatu, you got 3.5 as well. And so it's based on the population of those particular areas. Okay, expenditure limits are inclusive of GST. So you can't spend the limit and then have a GST content, add GST after that. It must be including GST. You cannot add limits together. So if you're standing for the mayor, for the ward, and for the community board, you can't have all those limits in one big pot of gold and go and spend the whole lot. You must only, the limit will be the mayor's limit for all three things that you stand for. Keep a good record of your expenditure, because you do need to account for it. Attached to your nomination form, or even in the back of the candidate handbook, if you have one, is the electoral donations and expenses return. Everybody must, by law, return one of those expenditures, return one of those returns. And I think it's due in by the 9th of December. And you need to just itemise what you are spending your money on and where you get your donations from, how much you get. Though completed forms will be held for 7 years and be on the council's website, and they'll be public information. Generally what happens is that if you are entitled to a nomination deposit refund, whether you're elected or unsuccessful, you won't get your refund until we get that form returned. So there's a little bit of an incentive there, just a little bit. Okay, so we mentioned earlier that the voting period, this is important too, so for those of you who are wishing to stand, the voting period starts on the 16th of September. Voting packs will go out to electors. Election day is the 8th of October, Saturday the 8th. You can campaign up until the midnight of the 7th. So if you've got billboards or hoardings out in the public, they must be down before Saturday morning, or by midnight on the 7th. During the voting period, special votes will be available from the Council's main office in Barks Corner and the service centres that we spoke about earlier. That's Waihi Beach, Karekari, Amakara and Te Puke. If you are going to be standing, please do not get involved in the collection of anybody's voting papers. It's a no-no. We don't want anybody seeing you do that. And voting will close at midday sharp. Following the close of voting, as we just touched on briefly, around about 2 p.m. you'll get a progress result, and like I said, that's about 95% of the votes that have been cast. So it's reasonably going to be pretty accurate at that point. What's missing are the special votes and anything that's been hand-delivered that's still working its way through to my office. Preliminary votes results on Sunday morning, so that will be everything excluding special votes. As I mentioned earlier, the special votes are a little bit of a tricky one. Council will be advised, results will be up on their website, and the final results will be expected around about in the afternoon of the Thursday, the 13th of October. I think not long after that, Dale will make a formal declaration which will go out into the newspapers or onto the Council's website. If you are elected, you cannot take office until after after you've been sworn in the swearing in process, which I believe Council will take care of. I talked about this candidate handbook. Those of you who are not familiar with it, please get one. They're at the back of the room here. If you want to get into the real nitty-gritty stuff, then go look at the legislation. That's the Local Electoral Act 2001. That's what the elections are based on and run by. The Local Electoral Regulations 2001, and you can access them by the legislation.govt.nz. Other resources: attend a council meeting, talk to incumbents, talk to current councillors about what's involved, how it all works, and they might be able to guide you on a few things and help you out. And have a look at some of the council material based on their website of agendas and meetings, meeting minutes and agendas and bits and pieces. That's always going to be really helpful as well. I'm not Dale, but I work with Dale, but that's our contact details up on the board there if you wish to take them down. They're also in the candidate handbook as well. Feel free to contact us at any point with any questions. More than happy to help. Also, Barbara's from the Western Bay District Council. Her details are in the candidate handbook as well.
Okay, so now it's the 9th of October and you've just discovered that you've been elected. And so there is a brief period where you are elated and you can celebrate with your whānau, and then you all come together as a mayor and councillors, and you are a team. And in order to make the dream work, we need teamwork. So you have to work together, and there's a number of key milestones or key processes that we need to go through in the first period after you've been elected, one of which is pulling together the local governance statement, the second of which is agreeing your code of conduct. So that's your rules for how you work together, both within the council chambers and outside of it. Standing orders, which sets out how your meetings are going to be run. You need to understand the ins and outs of the Local Government Act, which is our fundamental empowering legislation. You get to understand what staff can do and can't do. You work with the Mayor to determine the council or the committee structure for the forthcoming triennium and what the terms of reference or delegations will be for each committee. And you need to learn the ins and outs of a number of other pieces of key legislation that we administer as a council. So as Craig has mentioned, once you've received advice of the results, then we plan for the inaugural meeting. It generally tends to occur in the first week, somewhere in the first week of November. But we begin shortly after you've been elected, we begin a really thorough process of induction. We're expecting that our induction program this year will be quite different. And we are hoping that we might be able to call on the insights of some of our existing elected members to understand what works well as an incoming councillor and what we could do better to support new councillors, because it can be an overwhelming period, but we want to make it as planned and manageable and insightful as we can. But we are likely to begin with some insights about our community, which is ultimately who you are serving. We take you through and provide you with all of the equipment that you need to be an effective elected member. We talk about meeting times and expectations. Craig has touched on the remuneration, and it is set by the Remuneration Authority. And we do have the opportunity to influence from time to time what that might look like, but once the determination of the Remuneration Authority is issued, it is fixed. The reality is that there is some impact on private life. It is a big decision one makes to stand for council. Least of all is the reading. So if that's a skill that you haven't yet mastered, it's a skill that you definitely need. I'd like to think that it's manageable, but in order to be able to readily contribute at council meetings, that preparation is very necessary. And just rounding out our presentation for the evening is a particular shout out to all of our potential candidates, and that is we recognise, and I guess it's reflecting on the fact that we are wanting to encourage a diverse range of candidates to represent our council. And sometimes meetings present a barrier. So we would really like to understand from you what would make it easier for you to fulfil your role, perhaps if you've got a part-time job or a full-time job, or if you're a solo parent or whatever it might be. What do you think might make it easier for you to participate as an elected member or can make that decision to stand? And equally, if there are some things that you feel would assist you to understand the machinations of council that we haven't covered this evening, there are some little slips down the back, which are your top 3 things that you'd like to know a little bit more about, and we can assist you with that. So that brings us to the end of our presentation this evening.